All right, welcome everyone. Holding by the Noahide laws, and we spoke just a few weeks back about what's a Noahide, what's considered a Noahide, and we got off of just a track of Gir Toshav. So now there's going to be a question, right? A pretty basic question, but needs to be addressed, right? And that is, how does an Noahide become a Noahide? And is there a difference the way they accept the Noahide laws? Right? What about Mount Sinai? What was the covenant before? So there's another question we have to deal with that's important, right? Which, again, we're going to see, these two things here. That it was commanded by Moses, by the Almighty, by God, force people, which we spoke about this, force people of the world, who set the commandments, judge the Bnei Noach, to the children of Noach, and all who don't accept them shall be executed. Well, isn't that nice? Right? Whoever doesn't keep the laws, gonna die. Accepts them, if you accept them, you call it the Ger Toshav. Now, Ger Toshav has specific definition. Right? About living in the land, reject idolatry, or being a Noahide, right? There's a whole discussion. Then we said, anyone who accepts the 7 mitzvahs and are careful to observe them, they are called Mechassidei Umos Ha'olam. They're called the pious people of the world. They have a share of the world to come. So first we see you got to accept, they have to accept the laws. They don't accept them, they die. And if they do accept them, they're called the pious people of the world. If we assume number 11 over here, continuation of 10. Right, what we said before. Then a non-Jew that accepts the Noahide laws before a Beis Din, which we're going to speak about, before a rabbinical court, to become a Ger Toshav. How to become a Ger Toshav, that we're going to see. Right, that we mentioned. Let's say better, they went in front of a Beis Din, and they accepted upon themselves the Ger Toshav. And because they did that, they became Mechassidei Umos Ha'olam, right, of the pious of the world. Now, if that really is the case, and no non-Jew today can become Mechassidei Umos Ha'olam, you know why? Because we don't have Ger Toshav. That would be the logic. That would be the logic over here. Right? That would mean that the only possible way for a non-Jew to be a Noahide would be to be a Ger Toshav. Right? There'd have to be a Ger Toshav. Problem is, we don't have Ger Toshav today. Right? Regardless of what anyone will tell you. No, there's no such thing. No such thing as a Ger Toshav. Right? Because we don't have Yovel, we don't have Jubilee. Now, if 11, what we said that if they accept the laws, then they're the pious of the world, or the pious people of the world. If it's independent, then a non-Jew can be Mechassidei Umos Ha'olam. Why? They privately accept the Noahide law. Now again, what's it based on? It's based on what happened in Mount Sinai. That's what it's based on. So it's independent, as really independent of the laws of Ger Toshav. So therefore, a Noahide is independent of a Ger Toshav, and therefore it can be a Noahide without being a Ger Toshav. Now, today, there are a number of approaches how to deal with it. Rabbi Tal Joti and Mr. Javitz, he was one of the chief rabbis in Jerusalem, 1977, is a major rabbinic authority. And Rabbi Yosef Kahaneman wrote in Kuntres Divrei Torah, mentioned also Minchas Asher from Moshe Weiss, should be well. So their view, a little bit radical, or let's say most radical, and they look at both of these things in a majorly literal way. What do they say? They say that a Ger Toshav is a religious status somewhere in between. Somewhere in between that of Ger Toshav, right? Sorry, between the Jew and the non-Jew. What does that mean? Right? It sounds a little bit strange. They interpret acceptance of the Noahide laws who are based in as conversion to religion. What's the new religion? Ger Toshav. The Rambam we saw already said can't make up a new religion over here. Nonetheless, this is okay. This would be okay. Why? Because again, they're doing it in front of basis, not a new religion per se. I mean, we're looking at it as a new religion, but that we call it Ger Toshav. Give them a right to live in the land of Israel, be supported by a Jewish community, and become the righteous of the nations of the world. Now, according to this identity of Ger Toshav is not independent of each other. These things are not independent. But they don't exist absent of conversion. You have to see what this conversion is. So, what do we see over here? That 11 is really a continuation of 10. Right? That's what it seems like. But they admit over here it's only theoretical. Why is it theoretical? Because a person cannot be accepted as a Ger Toshav in our times. Like we said, there's no Jubilee year. If there's no Jubilee year, no status of a Ger Toshav. We don't have it today. So then, modern Noahides today, you have one option. You're going to be in a category of one who fulfills a commandment voluntarily. We spoke about that a few weeks back. So instead of being called the righteous of the peoples of the world, you'll be considered wise of the nations. Okay, it's also worth something. Right, not worth nothing over here. But it's not the same. Because they're not doing it based on obligation. They're doing it based on something voluntary. Now, we have to reject this interpretation. We have two reasons. One is, the majority of scholars look at Ger Toshav as a legal construct. Right? Not as a religious identity. Right? So that's a problem. Right? And, I was thinking that also. It's not a religious entity. Right? It's more a legal construct, right, of what it is. But who says it's a new religion? Who said it's a religious identity? Not only that, it goes against practical halachic reliance on the Rav, it's against the Mishnah's understanding of the Rambam, as we discussed before. So it's problematic for two reasons. Comes along Rabbi Yitzhak Zeb Soloveitchik, of blessed memory, and in the Kiddushei Ariz, right, says the Brisker Rav, and Rafala Cohen Suskin, they both write a literal meaning of the Rambam. Now, they don't go as far as Rabbi Joseph and Rabbi Kahneman. They treat Ger Toshav as a purely legal status. Right? You're not converting to anything. The legal status. But it's acceptance of the Noahide laws before a based in. That's required. That's obligatory. And every other aspect of Ger Toshav. Right? In other words, everything we spoke about Ger Toshav is going to fit over here. It's going to be supported by the community. They have to give up idolatry. Right? Keep the Noahide laws. Right? A lot of things. It's a legal status. Legal status. So they view number 11 over here as a continuance of number 10, just like we said before. And also say that the Noahide laws, you have to come before a based in order to become Mechasidi of Musa'olam. Become of the righteous of the peoples of the world. But what's the problem? We said there's a fundamental problem. You don't have Ger Toshav today. Because the Noahide essentially is going to be a Ger Toshav. Right? This legal construct of a Ger Toshav. Well, that's great. There's only one problem. There's no Ger Toshav today. No such thing. So reject it, just like we rejected Rabbi Zolchi and Rabbi Kahn. So comes along the worst of Meach, right, known as Rabbi Meir Simcha Cohen of Davinsk, wrote a major commentary of the Rambam. And Rabbi Meir Simcha agrees with Rabbi Soloveitchik that what? The Ger Tosha is not a conversion to a new religious identity. A legal construct. Alright, that's what it sounds like. In other words, what are you converting to? Person says we're not going to keep idolatry. They want to keep the Noahide law. So that's a technical thing. Right? That's not a new religion. Certainly doesn't sound like a new religion. So Rabbi Simcha also contains, just like the Ravid, the Ketzim Mishnah, that there are various facets of Ger Tosha that can be independent of each other. Right? It's not all one thing. They can be independent. But there is an issue. Right? What's the issue? He doesn't address our question. What about the Noahide laws? Does they have to go before a Beis Din to become a Chasidei Umas Ha'olam, to be from the righteous of the nation? Right? So what does this view allow us? Two possibilities. Either a Noahide accepts the commandments on his own, doesn't need a Beis Din, doesn't need a rabbinical court, and he still has the status of the righteous of the nation. Or you tell me, even though he should go before a Beis Din, but he can't because there's no status of a Ger Tosha of today, because we don't have a Jubilee year. Even though it's required, he can still become a Chasidei Umas Ha'olam. Right? We have no Ger Tosha. And we said before, not obligatory. Go in front of a rabbinical court to be a Noahide. They want to, they can't. Right? But there's no status of Ger Tosha. So if there's no status of Ger Tosha, then maybe they don't have the status of a Chasidei Umas Ha'olam. Then maybe they don't have the status righteous of the nation. So second possibility is maybe they do. So it's an onus. It's a technicality over here. Since we have no sabbatical year, we have no Ger Tosha, so why don't you just tell me, okay, you can't do it, but still you become part of the righteous of the peoples of the world. So another interesting aspect here. When we look at the status of Ger Tosha, we mentioned it's a legal construct. And it's not. Question is, do certain aspects of Ger Tosha exist independently in order to be one of the righteous of the nation? But again, all the elements of Ger Tosha are not necessarily the same. But what would we say? We're talking over here religious construct. But maybe it's also religious identity. Now, if it's religious identity, can't non-Jews become part of the Chasidei Umas Ha'olam? Why not? Why can't they become part of it? Even if it's based on a technicality, they can't go in front of a Beis Din today, because there is no Ger Tosha. But nonetheless, this religious conversion is different and independent of other aspects of Ger Tosha. Now, that would make sense. That would make sense if acceptance of the Noahide laws is acceptance of a new covenant. Right? A new covenant of Mount Sinai. Remember, what does the Rambam say? The Rambam says that in order for a non-Jew to be a Noahide, they have to say that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people of Mount Sinai. Passed it down to Moses. Moses passed it down to us. And part of these laws are the Noahide laws. So now, a non-Jew wants to convert. They want to convert to Judaism. Most important requirement for a non-Jew go in front of a Beis Din to convert is accepting all the laws. All 613 commandments. Doesn't matter. A lot of them don't apply today. They have to accept whatever the Torah says. And if they would say, listen, I'm going to keep, they go in front of the Beis Din. The Beis Din says you're going to accept all the commandments. They say, yeah, except, I want to eat shrimp. I want to eat shrimp. Or a woman says, married woman says, I'm not covering my hair. Mason's going to say, see ya, no condition. They have to accept everything that the Torah says. Everything that the rabbis tell. So therefore, since they have to accept everything, but what's crucial here, they're accepting the covenant that God made between himself and the Jewish people. So that aspect is also required before basing. Maybe? Right? That's the question. Does a non-Jew have to accept that aspect that God gave the Jewish people, the entire Torah? And included in that Torah is the Noahide law. Do they have to go that far and accept that or not? Now, it sounds, I might sign off on that. Right? That sounds logical. But let's look at it a little bit over here. If a non-Jew accepts the 7 mitzvahs, how is that the same as conversion in Judaism? Conversion in Judaism is all commandments. Everything. Even if they don't apply. Even if some of them don't apply. Right? So we're going to accept, or a convert's going to accept everything. He's got to accept everything. Right? But the reality is, he's going to accept, the convert is going to accept all these new commandments, which really is no obligation. In order to be a Jew, he's got to accept it. But up until that point, he's Jewish. Can he eat shrimp? He can eat shrimp. Can he watch football without feeling guilty? Yeah. Can he do other things? Yeah. Not a problem. That's before he accepts all the commandments. What about the Noahide laws? The acceptance of the Noahide laws involves accepting the laws which were part of a prior covenant. So non-Jews receive rewards, again, lesser type of this world, if they fulfill the Noahide laws, even without accepting them as what happened on Mount Sinai. They'll get a reward, not the same. It's not going to be the same. If a Noahide wants to accept the covenant from Mount Sinai, not a new body of law, not making up a new religion. What is he modifying? His obligation. Right? Because where does the obligation come from before? They were given to Adam. Adam passed them down to Noah. Had nothing to do with Mount Sinai. Essentially had nothing to do with Mount Sinai. So, if he doesn't mention Mount Sinai, he doesn't mention the covenants, and he only accepted the previous covenants, what's the difference? Right? You're going to say, who cares? Who cares? He accepted it. He didn't accept it. What's really the big deal? The big deal is there's only one practical difference. That is, what's the reward he's going to get? Because when a non-Jew becomes a Jew, what did he do? He said, I'm going to take on all the mitzvahs. That's a new legal, metaphysical, spiritual identity. So where do we learn it out from? Learn it out from Numbers chapter 15, verse 16. One mishpat, one judgment shall be for you and the converts. What does mishpat mean? Law, really. Right? The comparison between conversion and legal proceeding. It's like judgment. Right? The person, two Jews have an argument. They go in front of a rabbinical court. Right? Someone wants to convert, you have to go in front of a rabbinical court. But what's that talking about? That's talking about full conversion. This is not talking about the Noahide law. So seemingly, a non-Jew wouldn't have to do this. But what are we saying? We're saying it's not the same. The only reason it seemingly doesn't, we're going to say it's not the same, is because the reward is going to be different. Why are they keeping the Noahide law? Are they keeping it based on their own intellect? Are they keeping it based on a prior covenant? That prior covenant repercussions. Repercussions are what type of reward they're going to get. All right, so Rabbi Malkiel Tannenbaum, one of the scholars, contributed to this whole discussion that we mentioned a couple weeks ago in Tractate Baba Kama 38a. And he poses an interesting question. The question is, if a non-Jew accepts what happened at Mount Sinai, and they agree that God passed it down to Moshe, Moshe passed it down to us, including all those laws of the Noahide laws, right? So the question would be, why would the non-Jew, if they reaffirm the Noahide laws, right, what do they have to do with Mount Sinai? Why is it a reaffirmation that is predicated on the Geratosha? Right? What's the connection to Geratosha moving? In other words, if a non-Jew has to accept what happened at Mount Sinai, then why? What does that have to do with accepting being a Geratosha? Right? In other words, if we tie acceptance to Geratosha, it makes it impossible for them to accept it unless we accept Geratosha. But there's one problem: we don't have Geratosha. Right? So how does this help? So even without that, there's no reason the two should be related. Well, what should be the connection? So number 11 over here discusses Noahide in general, right, which is independent of the Geratosha. That's what we said before. We don't need them to be dependent on Geratosha. And if they are dependent on Geratosha, we get a problem. There's no Geratosha today, so how would it help? Right? It has to be independent. So there's no reason, essentially, to assume that a person has to accept the Noahide laws before base. Because if we're going to attach it to Geratosha, and there's no Geratosha, it doesn't help. All right, certainly not going to help. All right, that's going to be an issue over here. Now, comes over Moshe Weiner, and he wrote in his book, Sheva Mitzvahs Hashem, right, the 7 mitzvahs of God for non-Jews. So he looked at the Rambam, looked at other things, and what did he conclude? He concludes that acceptance of Noahide laws is sufficient to become Mechasidi Umusa'id, to become the righteous of the nation. He brings a raya, brings the proof over here. The Rambam, in the Laws of Kings, chapter 10, halacha 3, he says like this: does the Rambam, if ben Noach of the Noahides converted, circumcised, immersed in a mikvah? So now he might say good status of a Jew. He wants to go back, but he wants to go back and be a Geratosha. All right, we don't listen to him; he remains a Jew. In other words, the Jew who converts. Let's say better. A non-Jew who converts, in a long day. A non-Jew that converts. And it was a proper rabbinical court, proper basis. So 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later, they decide they want to go back and be a pagan. Right? They want to go back and over here and be a Geratosha. They don't want to stay with conversion. Well, if the conversion's proper, guess what? After 120 years, they 100% are going to get judged as a Jew. They have to know. There's no turning back over here. They are 100% going to get judged as a Jew. And then then the Rambam says, if he was a minor under the age of 12 or 13, he was immersed by Beis Din for the sake of conversion because it was in their benefit. We don't know, we're only going to convert minors if they're living with a family, or their family is in the process of conversion. So it's in their benefit to convert. But at the age of 12 or 13, depending on a boy or a girl, they may renounce the conversion. When they become bar bat mitzvah, and assume the status of Geratosha. That's different. That's different because they were underage. If they're underage, you give them a choice. Then you give them a choice. They can choose not to want to be a Jew. They can say, that's a different issue. But if someone probably converted over the age of bar mitzvah, and they decide later, if the conversion's good, they decide later to be a pagan, whatever, we don't allow them to go back. The conversion's valid. The conversion state. So now, what's the problem with a minor converting? Right? The Judaism can't convert on his own. Right? He can't make such a commitment. Yeah, he's going to live in the community. He's got no money. What's he going to do? The Beis Din oversees his conversion as a minor. But again, in the end, they allow him to choose. They allow him to choose his identity. Now, if he chooses to renounce it, he renounces Judaism, he's allowed to do so. All right, we're not going to force him here. We're not going to try and convince him. No reason to try and convince him. But today, if the Beis Din would see, just practically speaking, if they see, they converted this non-Jewish child, he's in a Jewish school, and everything's going good, they're not going to ask him. They generally may not ask him. But really, they should, just to see. If he renounces Judaism, not a problem. Comes along Rabbi Weiner, and he says, child automatically assumes the status of Ger Toshav when he renounces conversion. That's what he is. Now, what's the problem with that? The same problem we're dealing with. How can he be a Ger Toshav? How can you bring him back and be a Ger Toshav? There's no Ger Toshav. There's never Ger Toshav today. So that can't be the case. Because in every other instance which the Rambam talks about Ger Toshav, he's careful to say it doesn't apply in our time. The Rambam over here doesn't say anything. Doesn't seem to say anything over here. So says Rabbi Weiner, so I question what does the Rambam hold? He must hold Ger Toshav status of a mind who rejects its conversion exists. Because if someone's in the process of conversion, they ended up converting as a child. And now they're an adult, considered an adult. How can they go back to being Ger Toshav? They don't Ger Toshav. Right? How can they go back and take that status? What's the answer? Because there must be some status of Ger Toshav today. So what do we see? Says Rabbi Weiner, what do we see? That the child attains the status without having to accept the 7 laws before a Beis Din again. They already have that status. So therefore, someone who accepts the Noahide laws without acceptance before a proper rabbinical court gets some sort of partial identity as the Ger Toshav, even though Ger Toshav doesn't exist. He still gets the rights. It's considered Chassidi U'Masoil. Now, there is an issue. There's a couple of issues over here with this line of thought. Because there are other places where the Rambam discusses Ger Toshav, also where it doesn't apply. Right? There are a number of places. It doesn't make any qualification whether he's speaking about a time when Ger Toshav is accepted or not. So we could say, maybe from the context of the Rambam himself. Because what do we say over here? We can tell from the reference that talks about execution that this law does not apply in our time. Right? All right, no Ger Toshav today. Okay. But the Rambam mentions many times the Ger Toshav only applies when there's Jubilee year. But he may very well intend the rule to be an intrinsic definition of Ger Toshav. Therefore, maybe they need to restate this qualification. In either case, a little bit problematic. But that's how Rabbi Weiner wants to address the issue. Now, what does the Rambam himself say? Right, we'll use the Rambam's own words. And the Rambam answers the question as to the merit non-Jews receive. So the Rambam says, ask me a question about the Gentile nation. You should know God desires the heart, the matters, the heart's intention. Hereby our rabbi sages of truth, peace be upon them. What have they said? The pious and gentle nations have a share in the world to come. All right, now I have to see what this means. So that is, if they've achieved that which is proper to achieve, i.e. knowledge of God, knowledge of the Creator. Without a doubt, anyone who's improved his soul with correct virtues, wisdom, faith in God, blessed be He, is certainly among those destined for the world. Now, what's obviously missing, what the Rambam says, hey, I would ask, what happened to acceptance in front of a base? for eternal reward. Doesn't mention that. Not at all. Doesn't say anything about it. The Rambam states explicitly in this letter, the merit of the world to come is dependent on the hearts. On personal acceptance of Noahide laws, reaffirming what happened at Mount Sinai. Nothing to do with the basis. Zero. So we don't see anywhere, any Torah literature, that mandates acceptance of the Noahide laws before a basis. Be considered nechasidium u'sa'ilum. It's implied, maybe, how one reads the juxtaposition of these two paragraphs. But no, there's no source. No source at all. So what's the practical conclusion? The practical conclusion is that the acceptance of Noahide laws before a basis are required to become a Hasidium U'sa'ilum. Now, if a Noahide, let's make clear so I don't get thrown under the bus here. If a Noahide insists upon acceptance obligation for a basin, it's not prohibited. That I also said. Not prohibited. But he has no status of Ger Toshav. So he's got no status of a Ger Toshav. It's not forbidden. So there are groups out there doing it. They're telling people it's a good thing to do. Let them do it. Let them put a plaque up. It makes them feel good. Okay. It's prohibited. They still have the status of Chassidi U'Masa'ila. The righteous of the nation. Now, I would ask the question, because that's just me, I would ask the question, so why would you do it? First of all, what a basis will probably say you don't have to do it. Right? They'll probably push you away. But a person can insist and say, I want to do it. I want to do it in front of a basin. Now, a basin should do it. Are they obligated? No. Does it change any status? No. Does it make a person feel good? That's why they would do it. It gives them something. Right? It makes them feel in a certain way. They've done something formally. Okay? Right? That is worth something. I'm not going to, I said it's not worth tissue paper. That's what I said. But if it makes someone feel good, okay? No, disregard what I said. Yeah, you don't have to think what I think. It's fine. But practically speaking, it doesn't do anything. Right? It doesn't change your status. You still have the status of Chassidi U'Masa'ila. Status doesn't change. So it's not prohibited. If someone wants to do it as a formality, they're allowed to do it. It makes them feel good. Okay. It's like a formalization. I get it. Obligated? No such thing. All right, let's make clear. No such thing. It doesn't change a person's status. Now, last thing over here is, how does a person become a Ben Noach? So in order to accept 7 mitzvahs upon themselves, from a conviction they are divinely ordained, having been commanded to the world by God through Moses, who reaffirmed the covenant sealed with Adam and Noah. So if a person accepts the 7 mitzvahs as such, no question, you're one of the Chasidei U'Masa'ila. You're a pious Gentile in the highest status attainable by Ben Noach. Now, any personal acceptance of the 7 mitzvahs is sufficient. It makes logical sense, right? That a person, it makes logical sense that a person should, accept it in the form of an oath, a verbal oath, enumerating the 7 mitzvahs, stating the motivation, and accepting it. Now, you can use any text. The example here is, I accept upon myself the 7 commandments, children of Noah, including the general specific prohibitions of idolatry, murder, theft, immorality, blasphemy, eating the flesh stored from a living animal, general and specific commandments, established system of justice, as commanded to Noah, Adam, the descendants by the mouth of the Holy One, created the universe, as reaffirmed, transmitted by his servant Moshe at the beginning of the Torah Mount Sinai. Are you required to go before any Jewish court, any basin, or assembly of other persons? No. No obligation. Any personal, private, except 7 mitzvahs is enough. But, it's a good idea to make a verbal acceptance before witnessing. Now, I would say like this. I would say that you have to keep them, no question, based on the fact that God gave the Torah to Moshe, Moshe passed it on, just like we said. Now, we're saying over here, a person should verbalize it. Now, someone could ask the $1 million question, and what if you didn't? What if you thought in your mind, that's why I'm keeping the mitzvah? I'm keeping it because God gave the Torah to Moshe, right, reaffirmed the covenant seal with Adam, and then by Noah. What if you didn't say it? Is that invalid? I don't know if it's invalid. I don't know if it's invalid at all. Now, what's clear is a good thing to do. A verbalization is a good thing to do. Are you obligated to do it? Right? Now, we're saying over here it makes logical sense to do it. But that's not my question. My question is, do I have an obligation? Want to know, do you have an obligation? My answer would be no, they don't. They don't have an obligation. But it makes logical sense. They should do it. Right? When you verbalize something, you write it down, take it more seriously. Right? 100%. Do I have to do it in front of witnesses? No. Do I have to do it in front of a beis din? No. Right? I could, if you want to do it in front of witnesses, let's say better, you could. Right? It makes it official. Right? People like official things today. Right? But again, I could throw this whole thing out. I'm good at doing things like that. I can throw the whole thing out. And say, you know what? It doesn't really matter. So you're going to, if a person thinks that, and that's why they keep the mitzvahs, that's good enough. Verbalization, I don't know. Who says they have to do it? Who says they have to verbalize? On the other hand, I would say, you know what? Good thing to do. Do it in front of witnesses. You signed it because it shows what you're doing. It shows how serious you're taking it. But make no mistake, like we said before. Make no mistake, you don't have to do it in front of a basin. You don't have to do it in front of a basin. If a person says, I want to go, I want to make it formal, and whatever, they're allowed to do it. They're allowed to do it. Obligated? No. Right? So that is the status of how one becomes a Noahide. And, what the problem is with the status of Ger Toshav. Now, to answer the status of Ger Toshav by becoming one of the Chassidim Umas Olam, is it independent, non-independent of the Noahide laws? Yeah, so any questions on any of that? Or anyone have any general questions? All right, so no other questions. I'm going to sign out. If anyone has any questions, feel free. You can shoot me an email. And Ray, I hope you're feeling better. And well, I guess I'm going to wish everyone a good middle of the day, or almost end of the day for me. And everyone have a great rest of the week.